Okay, it is 1:10. We are good to go. Hi everyone. Welcome to our field school session. I am Cassia. I'm one of the events coordinators for the Anthropology Society, and Shahani will be helping me moderate the event today. So we have Dr. Brand and Dr. Dorland joining us today. The event will be recorded and posted to our website within the next 2 days. If you would like a copy, please email us to get a hold of that. We would like to thank the professors for your time and being here. And we'd like to start the meeting with a land acknowledgement to recognize our relationships and privilege we have to work, meet, and live on the land that UTM stands on. Okay, so we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Today's session will be completely informal. Any student who wishes to ask questions about field school and what they need to know are free to raise their hand and unmute or to comment in the chat. If your question is directed at a specific professor, please indicate that in your question. For those watching later, if you have any questions, please email us and we will get back to you. Without further ado, we will get started. I will ask each professor to quickly introduce themselves and their grad school alma mater. And first, would Dr. Brand like to start us off?
Okay, I'm Michael Brand. I've been a sessional teacher at UTM now since 2005 and taught the field school since 2013. And my old field school when I was an undergraduate in long ago days was in Keatley Creek in BC, which is a interior Salish pit house village, and up in Bella Coola on the northwest coast.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Brand. Would Dr. Dorland like to go next?
Hello, everybody. I'm an assistant professor contract at UTM, and I focus on Great Lakes archaeology. And I did my field school in Manitoba, in a small, louder Manitoba outside of Brandon. Very boring place, except for the tornadoes that we had to deal with. But I have experience of doing field schools outside of U of T. So I'm glad to answer your questions you have.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Dorland. And we're so glad to have you with us, as well as Dr. Brand. And we'd like to get started with the field school Q&A with some questions posed by students through our social media. If any of the students have questions at the moment, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute or comment in the chat. And I will post the questions in the chat after I've asked them, just for the professors to know what we're asking. And so for our first question, what exactly is a field school and what is expected if we do participate in one? Are there any large fees students have to pay?
Do you want to start, Steve, or do you want me to start? Or
Why don't you start, and then I can talk after.
Okay. A field school is an opportunity for you to, one, and probably most importantly, try out archaeology and see if it's something that you're going to like. I've had a number of cases where we have a student one day and the next they're gone because they didn't like pushing through the bush or something like that. So it's a good opportunity for you to see whether or not this is something that you want to continue in. And the other important role it plays is teaching you basic archaeological field methods, sort of giving you, like I talk about it as being a toolkit. You acquire these methods and you can employ them in a variety of different situations. And so you get an opportunity to learn all these different tasks like mapping, which is critically important, documentation, so keeping field notes, filling out excavation forms correctly, which is critically important, photography, survey procedures like pedestrian survey, so foot survey, shovel testing survey, and then also excavation as well. And then some field schools also include analysis, sort of the processing, cleaning of artifacts, the analysis of artifacts afterwards. Expectation-wise, you'd be expected to fully participate in all of the tasks that are being taught. Archaeological fieldwork is not a singular endeavor. It's teamwork all together. Everyone has to sort of work towards common goals. So in addition to learning the different tasks and participating in the different tasks, then you would be expected to help with things like transporting equipment back and forth to sites, sort of pulling your share of the work as we go along. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so what Dr. Brandon's talked about there is kind of the traditional based field school. And it really depends. Like in my field school, we didn't do a lot of survey. It was just primarily single unit excavation. But I've been on other field projects where you did various different, and it depends, if you're doing underwater or if you're in the desert, if you're in the bush or you're from the Arctic. They're all going to be accommodating and kind of account for the different environments and different skills you're going to need. But also more recently, in the last maybe 10, 20 years, there's a development of field schools that are more non-invasive, either through, like there's a field school at Western where it's all non-invasive. So you learn about techniques used by geologists and archaeologists to find sites using things like ground penetrating radar and stuff like that. But then you also have field schools that are meant to kind of decolonized field schools. So working with Indigenous communities and integrating community-based learning and land-based learning with the kind of more traditional approach to doing archaeology. And so there are examples of that, especially in the Great Lakes. I know a colleague of mine, John Creese at North Dakota State University, had a field school with the Indigenous community there, and you kind of learn a more of a hybrid style. So it really depends where you are in the world and what the nature of the project is. You could be working on a UNESCO World Heritage site, or you could be finding sites, or you can be on a local site. So there's a lot of variety. The other part, the fees, it really depends. Like if you go to the website for UTM, you're paying for the semester, I think the one half semester. But if you're doing it through the international abroad at Woodsworth College, I think downtown, or you could be paying like $7,000, $6,000. It can get expensive. But you're also paying a lot for the flight, right? So you're paying for flight and accommodations and food. And usually your food and all that's covered if you're staying at a camp or something or in a particular area. But what I would recommend is you have to do a field school. Like if you want to do archaeology, you have to do a field school. If you want to do CRM, you need that field experience. And I've talked to students who loved archaeology, and then when I told them what archaeology actually can be, they're like, oh, I don't like any of that. I don't want to do any of that. So maybe they should go into classics or something like that. But it really does vary. And I would encourage you to, just do some research and find out what interests you. There's field schools in the Polynesians, there's field schools in the Near East, in Africa and South America and East Asia. They're all over the place, and there's a lot of different opportunities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dorland. Now we're going to move on to our second question, which is, how would a student apply for a field school? Are there any requirements such as Cgpa minimum or experience needed? And attached to that question is an undergraduate field school experience generally required for graduate programs in archaeology?
Shall I start off again? So applying for a field school will depend on the field school that you want to attend. So like Dr. Dorland said, you want to do some research, figure out what you want to do. A lot of people use this as an opportunity to get experience traveling to another country and spending a period of time in another country. Our own field school, I think the applications are sort of released in March. I think we have about a 2.0 Cgpa is what we're kind of looking for at a minimum. But the higher you have, the better, because there are limited spots on most field schools, and it becomes somewhat competitive in that way. There's generally no minimum experience, because that's why you're coming to. This is, field schools are generally intended to be your first experience with archaeology or whatever sort of subdiscipline you're looking at. So I don't think you'd have any troubles that way. When it comes to should you have a field school if you're thinking of going on to graduate program, I agree with Dr. Dorland that definitely, yes, you want to have a field school. You know, if you're, I mean, nowadays MAs are fairly short, but you're going to think you're committing, you know, financial resources and 2, maybe 3 years of your life to graduate studies in archaeology. You really want to know if that's something that you're going to want to take on as a career. So I think it's definitely worthwhile having a field school.
Yeah, and I think based on, I think some that are more competitive, like for example, you're trying to do a field school with the Institute of Field Research, I think, you might have to fill out like a questionnaire and maybe some small answers, but yeah, you need, like, to do archaeology, often a lot of programs require you to have some kind of field experience. And in some cases it can be like, when I did my field school, I just got a credit because it was through, you know, Brandon University. But there are also opportunities to do, I think like a 399 or something like that, where you would take part, not necessarily in a field school, but you would take part in an archaeological project with a professor, and you would kind of just, you know, on the job training, and then, you know, write, you know, report, and it's kind of in a similar way, but it's a slightly different kind of dynamic. So yeah, there's a lot of variety, but as Dr. Brown was saying, that, you know, the GPA and all that, like often you need it to go through the program. So more space, probably space and applying in advance, because sometimes it could be a first come first serve or something like that. So you want to make sure you have the schedule and you're aware.
I mean, I could just add to that. If you're looking at taking a field school from an institution other than U of T, you want to send the information about that field school to the department. Usually I think it goes to Angela, and then what Angela do is she'll send it around to some of the faculty and ask them if it would qualify for a credit with something that we have in the department, you know, whether it would qualify as an 318 credit, for example. That way, you know, you don't run into an issue of not getting credit for the course that you've taken when you come back to UTM. So I don't think it's usually a big deal. Just send a note to Angela with the information about that field school, and then she sends it. I've looked at a couple of them, and we just look to see if it's comparable to what we would give credit for a field school here at UT.
Yeah, I would think that maybe like if someone running a field school that's an avocational archaeologist, so what an avocational is not, it's a kind of, they're not fully professional archaeologists, and it's not a professor of some kind or some kind of instructor. I think that those kind of things, that they want to make sure that you're getting that quality education and learning to know what to do.
All right, perfect. Thank you for answering that question. And you guys both did touch upon this before, but people want to know, are there any complications or downfalls with field school? What are the best and worst parts about them?
Well, I think it's just interesting work, probably regardless of what site you're on. It can be really fascinating to, you know, to have an opportunity to participate firsthand in field work, excavation or survey field work. I think, you know, some of the field schools that Dr. Dorland talked about that are done in conjunction with Native American or Indigenous communities would have even more benefits that you would come away from that. You generally meet and get to know your fellow students really well, and you know, I stay in touch with people that I had my field school with to this day. So yeah, and I ended up working with a lot of them in consulting afterwards and that. So had a good sort of network and rapport there. Downsides, I don't know of too many downsides. I kind of fell off a cliff during mine, but survived, so that's okay. There are sort of physical dangers. Yeah, heat stroke would be one that you'd want to watch for as well. I think the other thing that you kind of need to think about is if you're paying several $1,000s for a field school and the first day you find out you don't like it, you're kind of stuck. that. So that, I mean, that could be one of the potential downsides. And, you know, I mean, with ours, you know, if you come out the first day and I make you push through the bush on the north end of campus and you don't like that at all, well, you just go home and don't come back. But if you're in another country and that, then, you know, you're incurring a lot of cost for a hard lesson in that sense. So you kind of, I think, have a good look at the information that they're providing about what you're going to be doing. And, you know, you can kind of judge it from that. I'll turn it over to Dr. Dorland.
Yeah, so the best parts is, you know, you get to travel and you get to have experiences that I don't think you would ever have anywhere else. Like, you know, when I went to, even as a TA, when I went to South Africa and working in the middle of Namakwa lands, you know, that was something that I never will have, you know, I never would have had that opportunity. Or, you know, working the Seashell Coast in BC, or, you know, seeing tornadoes hit all around your site. Like, you're going to have some very, you know, great experiences. You're going to, you know, make lasting connections. Now, there is like a worst part, and I think it's important to talk about, especially with like things that have been going on in the last, with the kind of Me Too movement and stuff like that, is you could be going with instructors and institutions that you have no idea who they are. And unfortunately, there is a legacy of sexual harassment and forms of sexual violence at field schools. Some, depending the instructor, the director, may be very open about, because the thing is you're in a class, but you're not in a class when you're not doing the field school, because you finish at 4:30 and then you're essentially kind of on your own, depending where you are. And so, you know, people consume alcohol and stuff like that, but you can be involved in a cultural place where, you know, due to different cultural views, or, you know, you're going to be dealing with sexism and you're going to be dealing with harassment. So it's very important. And it's you know, it's really important to highlight this too, because it is an amazing opportunity. But especially as there's a growing field of young women in archaeology, and harassment is, you know, regardless of genders, but it's primarily against young women, to do your research and find out, you know, who's running the field school, who the director is, you know, do they have a reputation? Because there's some very notable names in archaeology that have been called out and have, you know, had to get fired and are dealing with basically being predators in the field. So that's something to be very aware of. But over the years, these kind of concerns have been recognized, and so you're getting more inclusive field schools where, regardless of your gender orientation, you're going to feel comfortable to be there, and you're going to be able to have that great experience. But those are the worst parts. You know, the natural disaster, natural dangers are also bad, but that's something that to be aware of. And if you are doing it through the University of Toronto, there are resources and people that you can reach out to during that experience if anything comes up. So when you are in the field, do be aware that you have, you know, areas and people and resources you can go to if needed. But I think it's really good to highlight that, because I think that's something that often gets overlooked. And unfortunately, that is a reality in archaeology, and as a discipline, we're trying to deal with this. But there's still a lot of it. And there's recent articles that talked about surveys related to this, and it's pretty clear. So that's something you definitely want to be aware of.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Dorland.
If I could just add on there, you know, sort of along the lines of the sort of work standards practices, if you think something is unsafe, you can say, I do not want to do that. I think that's unsafe. And in a lot of cases, you should bring that up to either a TA or an instructor if you think something is being done unsafe. You know, kind of going on, when I was an undergraduate, you know, like archaeology kind of had the reputation of like the cowboys of science kind of idea, where a lot of things were done without a lot of health and safety in mind. But I think a lot of that has changed now, and there's much more of a focus on being safe. But you know, I guess I'm saying, don't be afraid to speak up if you think something is unsafe.
Yeah, both of those are really good points. And thank you for acknowledging that point also. So we're going to move on to our fourth question, which is, what is the commitment like and how long does a field school typically last?
All right, well, commitment wise, well, let's start duration wise. They all run different lengths. So the field school I had as an undergraduate was 3 months long. We spent a month in the classroom, and then I spent a month in at Keatley Creek and a month in Bella Coola. The one we run here on campus is 2 weeks is all we get for the field component of the class, because the university is trying, or the department is trying to be, you know, sort of recognize that students have to work through most of the summer to be able to afford their schooling. So we do 2 weeks in the field, and then we continue for the rest of the semester in the lab and in the classroom. Other projects are going to vary considerably on how long the field schools operate, and that 6 weeks is probably, you know, a fairly common length of time. But again, it depends on the project. Some projects run multiple field schools in a season, so they'll sort of cycle students through, and that, yeah. But the ones I know of are sort of in that 6 weeks kind of time period, I think, mostly now.
Yeah, so kind of to give an idea of kind of like how something, so for example, like the one that when I TA'd with Dr. Genevieve Duar at University of Toronto Scarborough is, I think in total it might have been 3 weeks to a month, but we're in the desert, so you work until 4:30, right? But after you do work, your field work, you know, you got to do your data analysis. So you're kind of like, you're committed for the full month, or, you know, 2 months, whatever. And then as Dr. Brand's talking about, some can be divided up. So it depend on, you know, like how, like, I guess like at UTM, you do a 2-week field school, and then you take your kind of lab component into the fall. So it really depends, like some are longer, some are shorter. And this is where you want to find something that works for you. Like, for example, if you don't do well in hot weather, or you don't have the funds, you know, to go to a larger one, then you can get that good experience at another field school opportunity where you get the field experience, but it's not, some of them like are part-time. I think there was one that I saw in Western Illinois University where the students it was like, you go back and forth to the site. So commuting to the site in the summertime. So it was almost like a part-time kind of thing. So yeah, you really want to find out like how it's going to work. But normally they're going to be in the summertime, and it's going to be, yeah, like as Frank said, like, you know, 4 to 6 weeks.
And you should, I guess, on that sort of note and commitment wise, like plan it to be all day long, every day, right? And usually attendance is mandatory, you know. So you sign up, like the UTM one, the department considers the field days to be mandatory, and you have to have some pretty extenuating circumstances to be allowed to miss one. It's not something where you can just decide, oh, I'm not going to go to class today, because with the whole day it was too much.
Isn't a big component like actual like participation field work. So like you get tested on tests and maybe a final report, but, you know, like the one I did, I think 50% or more was based on actual participation. So actual archaeological experience, because that's what you're there for, right? Like everything else you can do another course. So yeah, you're kind of, you're committed for the full time. But I guess at UTM, like you go there during the day and it ends and then you leave. But if it's outside of the country, then, you know, you're committed. Now, the thing is you could get heat stroke or something like that, and you're not, you know, usually the professor's not going to be like, okay, too bad, keep going. Like your health is a concern, right? So if you do end up with that, you know, you can take a day off. But yeah, you're expecting to fully be immersed in it.
You're muted.
Thank you. So the next question is, how does taking field school classes equate to real world practical experience?
I guess there's a couple ways that you could look at that. In terms of most field schools that you would take would give you sort of, excellent training for research archaeology, to go, to the sort of the work of the archaeologist in an academic setting. Some of them, like in the UTM field school, we try and focus on also giving students a good introduction to some of the primary methods that get used in CRM work. So things like pedestrian survey and shovel testing and those kinds of things. But regardless, so if you, the field school you take and you want to go into, say, CRM work, it's going to be beneficial whether they have a focus on CRM stuff or not, because they, you're going to gain an understanding of artifacts, you're going to gain an understanding of how sort of field work functions. And the consulting companies, really, they're used to training people to do it the way they want it done. So you'll come in with the basics and then they can sort of say, okay, that's great, this is how we do it. And you can sort of adapt your techniques that way.
Yeah, and I would add too, so Dr. Brand's talking about kind of the direct impact related to the CRM industry and archaeology, but even if you don't go into archaeology, you're learning interpersonal skills, you're learning communication skills, project management, team building. You're going to be immersed in different cultures. You're going to learn about cultural tolerance. There's so much benefit. Like I liked my field school being in Brandon, but like it would have been amazing to go to the Near East or, to Peru and just be immersed in a completely different environment. I come from Northern Ontario, and Lauder, Manitoba are pretty much the same, with the exception of the tornadoes. So a lot of, bugs, a lot of ticks, a lot of poison ivy, none of that was exciting. We met some locals, but you have a great opportunity. Like, I think it provides, it's amazing what you can see, and the skills, if you go into any kind of heritage or any kind of NGO or anything where you're working with people, like you're learning all these essential skills that, depending how creative you are, you can market yourself and however you want to use that. But even if the big thing is the financial constraint, but if you have that ability to take it, it's a great experiential learning process, and you meet really great people, and you learn some great training and skills of day-to-day life, I guess.
All right, thank you. And our next question is, how is field school affected by the pandemic, and what experiences can they get during COVID?
I think with the pandemic, most field schools, especially in the first year, were just shut down and they didn't operate. We were able to run the UTM field school, but we had to put in place some pretty significant regulations and in the way we work. So typically we would all work in one area. So we're all excavating together, 3 people in a unit, and switching off jobs and that sort of thing. And we found a really nice remains of a barrel cistern in 2019, and we were really keen on opening up the units around that, which would mean we all work really close together. And when COVID came, that was no longer possible. We couldn't have people that close together. And so to be able to keep the field school going, what I did was, instead of focusing on one area, we worked in 3 different areas. So we were keeping people apart. We had people sort of grouped into groups of 3s that worked as sort of a little pod. That's the term they like to use. And we worked, so one person would excavate, one person would screen, one person would do the notes, and then people would rotate, and we could always keep a safe physical distance between ourselves doing that. And the students we had that year, and we did it again just this past summer in the same way. The students were fantastic. Everybody followed the rules, and we didn't have any problems at all. So we were really fortunate that we were able to go ahead with it. But I think a lot of the ones that I'd heard of the first year for sure, they didn't go ahead. They didn't go ahead at all. Now, overseas ones, you couldn't travel. So a lot of those wouldn't have been options for most people. We kind of followed, I guess I should know, like I looked at the consulting industries guidelines, the guidelines that the Canadian Archaeological Association put out, and the guidelines that Liana, the union that's operating in Ontario now for archaeological field techs, all the guidelines they put out, and we sort of made sure where we were working up to industry standards on those regulations and procedures.
Yeah, I can't really add anything to this because I don't have any. There were a lot of field schools that were closed, but yeah, I think it depends how it's set up and the nature of it. But yeah, hopefully, we're not going to have to deal with that with more people getting vaccines and all that. But that is something that, unfortunately, it's hard to get around, especially if you need it for a graduate program or something like that. But you could take it, I guess, in the summer of your fourth year, if you really need to. But yeah, that's an unfortunate thing because it is so hands-on. But as Dr. Brand said, there are institutions and field schools that kind of have adapted to still give that experience.
I have to say we were really fortunate that Dr. Miller was the Vice Dean of Teaching and Learning, and she was really, really helpful in the whole process of getting the field school permission essentially to run. That first year it was on, and then it was off, and then it was on again, and then it maybe wasn't going to go ahead. She and I and Trevor and Dr. Para met weekly to go through all the forms and the paperwork and that kind of thing that had to be put in place. So that we were lucky, I guess what I was saying there is that the administration, the department and administration were really supportive and were really interested in working, towards finding a way that we could make it happen safely for everybody.
Perfect, thank you. And our final question, which kind of relates to the pandemic one, if field schools require a lot of commuting, how would it look like when students are traveling to other cities, provinces, territories, or even other countries? Will the field school also be covered by the school?
Probably Dr. Dorland is better to answer this one. I don't have a lot of experience with field schools outside of the country, but my sort of understanding is most of them that run programs that take international students do it as as a sort of a inclusive kind of thing. So that you would be staying probably close to the site. They would be providing transportation to the site on a daily basis to and from and that sort of thing. But and of course with ours, you commute like you would to come class to any class kind of anyway. But yeah, I'll let Dr. Dorland sort of go into that one.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot I can say other than if you're going to certain countries, you'll have to, make sure you're vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccinations, but also make sure that you have all other forms of vaccinations, right? So when I went to South Africa, if you're going to a certain country that you're going to be in a more rural area, meet with a doctor and make sure you have all your shots and all that, because you don't want to end up going on the plane, and then not being allowed to get in. So you want to make sure you have all that, and especially with COVID-19. I guess there were still field schools, right? It really depends on the nature of the director, the institution, how they were doing it. You have to remember when Canada was shut down for COVID for quite a long time, places in the US were open. I had colleagues who were doing in-person learning in the middle of the pandemic, right? So it really depends what country you're going to, and all that information will be available. So, and I see Ines has a question here. I would think that, especially with UTM, that with COVID restrictions, everything opening up and people having their their U passport or Vax passport, that it would kind of get back to where they were, right? So we have, I guess, Dr. Brand can talk more about that.
I think so far we don't know how that's going to pan out for this year's field school. I suspect a lot of it will have to do with how well things go over the next couple months with the return to in-person. And if they're all, they're correct and the peak is over for the current strain, and things go well, we may be able to return to a more normal, sort of approach to the work. Otherwise, I think the work that we've done, the way we've been doing it the last couple of years, this has actually worked out quite well. And it's given us an opportunity to look in places that were kind of not on the top priority list. And we found some pretty interesting things that come out of it. So I'm pretty confident that at least for the UTM one, we'll be able to go ahead this year, but exactly where that's going to fall between the spectrum of 2020 and now, I'm not sure.
The other thing to add is like a lot of these field schools are only going to have 6 to 10 people, so you're not going to be in a very densely populated group. Like the field school in South Africa that I TA'd, there's 9 people maybe. The one in Louder was 10. Like, so you're not in a dense group, so it is more possible, as Dr. Brand was saying, to create these kind of ways to just kind of have a little bit more social distancing, but you're still getting the same field experience.
And if I could just put in about the commuting, if you're looking at the website for a field school and it doesn't really talk about how you're going to get there or how you get to site on a daily basis, I would send an email and ask, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to answer any questions, and that it'd be good to have all of that worked out ahead of time before you get on the plane to head off to a foreign land, so you just rest a little easier in your own mind in that.
Yeah, and if you're worried about not getting a spot, I would create a strategy of look for kind of so say you want to stay in Ontario, you can go check out Trent University, you can check out Western University, you can check out Wilfrid Laurier. I think they might have a field school. So there are other options that it will require a little bit more commuting, but the cost is going to be a lot less because you're not going to another country, and it's still, you would just have to get to that place. And if it was, say, in another city in Ontario, then there'd be accommodations that you'd have to pay for, but they would probably help arrange that, so at least the process would be a little bit easier to engage with.
Great, thank you. Just one more question. A student wants to know if it will be if the getting into field school is competitive, or is it, again, first come first serve basis?
I would say that there is a competitive aspect to it, because there are limited spots, and so when making decisions on that, they're probably going to put marks fairly high towards the top. Although sort of I've experiences with field schools that I've TA'd, and that oftentimes people who have a mix of A's and B's in their transcript do very well in field schools. They have a lot of sort of practical skills, I found, that function well. But there will be a competitive part to it. There'll be some of the things that I think get taken into account are your sort of Cgpa is one. The year that you're in, if this is your last opportunity to take it, that may make a difference if you meet sort of the requirements. The statement that you give as to why you want to take a field school, I think most of them, they have a question, why do you want to take an archaeological field school? That will factor into it as well. It's always, a case where there's limited enrollment, limited spots. I think we have for 318, we have 16 as the cap, and 418. So if you take 318 and you like it and you want to come back and do some more, you can take the advanced field methods course, which is ANT 418 the following year. Young Faye is on, she did that this year, and there's only 4 spots for that. So And with COVID, we've kind of ended up going with even less students this year. So yeah, it will be competitive to a degree.
Yeah, I guess if you're worried, like the first thing is like the departments know that, especially what program you're in, if you're going to need it. But if you can't get into an actual field school, you know, explore the 399. I don't know if that's, or whatever the code is, where basically you just do field work and tie it to, and reach out to professors and see, because it's going to be a different experience kind of working with, you know, say you're not in a field school with colleagues, but you're at a field project. You're still going to get that field experience. It's going to be a different, but it could also in some ways provide opportunities that you might not have at a field school, because you're kind of getting right in there. Whereas a field school is about learning how to do the techniques. And in some cases, you're kind of just thrown in, which at first can be overwhelming, but it can also be, you know, really fun, because you're getting, like, you see archaeological materials and archaeological sites that have, you know, just amazing cultural material culture. So if you're worried about this spot, you know, it would be good to have a plan, have an outline or a guide of which one you really want to go to, which one you want to go to, which one, and kind of get 5 examples, reach out to professors. You know, like professors, I think there's a misconception that students think professors don't want to hear from students. It's more professors don't want to hear students complain about grades. But if you're asking about like field schools and graduate opportunities and any interest in archaeology, you know, often they're very open to that. So, you know, don't only look at UTM. Like you have, like, U of T is a very large anthropology department when you combine Scarborough and St. George, and you have people working in China, Near East, South America, Africa, Portugal, like everywhere, right? And you can also look into the classics department downtown. You can do field work in Crete, in places in Greece and Turkey. Like there's a lot of opportunities. So if you just kind of have to be a little more creative, I guess, if you're worried.
So I addressed the question in the chat about field tech positions. I'm guessing that means you're thinking of CRM work there. Is that correct, Nandanika? Yep. Okay. So where you've had the field school, so that you can certainly point that out, and you can talk about. I would talk about, you know, having done some pedestrian survey and having done test pitting, and sort of an understanding of mapping and those kinds of things. If you haven't done a field school and you're applying for a field tech position, then you can highlight the courses you've taken that would be relevant. So if you've had Dr. Dorland's Eastern and North America archaeology class, that would be highly relevant. If you've had ANT 312, where you've actually, you know, had the opportunity to handle artifacts and learn about different kinds of artifacts, that would be very relevant as well.
Yeah, the best thing to do now is the Canadian Archaeological Exchange is a Facebook group. And I know some people are very anti-Facebook, want to get off of social media, but it also provides an avenue where and the Ontario Archaeology Society, they both have Facebook groups, they have websites as well, where they list jobs. And I would highly recommend to join the Ontario Archaeology Society Facebook group, because they constantly are posting field tech positions. And right now is kind of, they're looking there, and it's all over the GTA. So use those avenues. Yeah, Shawnee's put that in there. And then, like, one thing, I was interviewed, like I did my field school and I was all prepared for it, but really one thing they asked, like, how do you deal with weather? You know, what are your experience dealing with conditions? Can you work are you flexible in working in, you know, outside extreme heat and cold, and can you deal with that? So if you can talk about, you know, experiences that if you've taken the courses and maybe you didn't take the field school, what other outside experience Even things like, I enjoy hiking. I enjoy, these things show that you're not afraid to be outside. Because I think sometimes CRM, because you could be at a site that's amazing. It's like nice weather, and it's not hard digging, and all these things. And then you could be at a site and it's like it happens to be plus 40 and it's humid and you're digging in clay, and like you just double guessed everything you've done and why you even have this job. So the flexibility and ability to adapt is something that really shows strength, right? You have the ability to, and it's not like there is a level of labor, but a lot of like colleagues that I've worked with in CRM were women, and that's not going to be an impact. It's just more about the ability to deal with different conditions, I think, is the main thing. So if you just show that, yeah, if I enjoy hiking, I enjoy being outdoors, I have no problem with this. But the field school is beneficial, and yeah, any introductory class of archaeology or history, anything like that, anything tied to heritage, just to demonstrate and volunteer experience, because anything like that, it just shows that you are interested in this, that you're passionate about this, that you're committed to this, and that you're going to want to do a good job in this. So you can be creative if you're missing it, but you really want to have some kind of field experience.
Right.
Oftentimes, one of the things that they're really looking for are people who can work well in a group. Like they need crews who can get along, and so they oftentimes, when I was years and years ago, when I was out west in the company that I worked for out there, like they kind of hired for personality because they knew they could train you to do the work pretty quickly. So, indicating that you work well in a group, and that is probably something that's worth mentioning as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Brand and Dr. Dorland, for providing so much information on all our questions today. We do have
Shahadia, just quickly, sorry, that's the link for field work if you're in the States.
Oh, perfect. All right. Yeah, and we'd like to open up the floor for any more questions that students have in the last couple minutes. You can put it in the chat or raise your hand. We'll give a little minute or two. Cassie's asking if you guys have any best experience in the field school.
Best in the field generally, or just in a field school? I've had lots of great experiences in archaeology, especially when I get to go in a helicopter, because that's the best thing. I think one of my sort of favorite days is I was surveying along the Fraser River, and we found 10 boulders that had petroglyphs on them that had previously not been recorded. I'm sure people knew about them in the community and that around, but in terms of recorded as an archaeological site, they had never been recorded. And to walk down the side of the river and find one rock after the other that have these just fantastic images on them was kind of mind-blowing,
Yeah, I guess for me it was because I'm so ingrained in the Great Lakes archaeology, where time maybe oldest site is like 14,000 years in Ontario, going to Africa and finding artifacts that are pre-human, that are like 200,000 years, that were not even made by Homo ergaster. That was really cool. But to be honest, my greatest experience was probably kind of after the field school, like after the day, and just sitting on like the side of a hill watching like the sunset go down in the middle of South Africa. Like just the memory of seeing, like where we were, there was no towns, there was no light pollution, it was complete. You don't see anything. You see trucks once in a while, kind of herders drive by. But that was an experience that I would never get anywhere. And when you get stuff like that, it's, you know, kind of imprinted in your brain. So it's an amazing experience. I'd encourage you to do it. And you can also, like, some people after they do the field school, they go travel. So you're already over there, you've already paid for a flight or something, and then kind of turn it into a little bit of a, you know, travel for yourself. So and we did talk about like the negative elements of it, but it's such a great experience. It really is.
All right, perfect. If there's no more questions, we did send a link again to UTM's Anthropology Field School website if you have any further questions that we kind of missed during this session. And once again, thank you to all our professors for providing such valuable information on field school and what we need to be prepared for. Thanks to those who came out and participated. This will conclude our information session. It is recorded, so we will be posting it onto our website in a couple of hours, maybe a day or two. And we just want to remind you that we do have our upcoming career information session coming in February. It's going to be February 17th, and we'll be also giving out roses, teddy bears, and candy grams for Valentine's Day on campus on February 11th and 14th. So please stay in tune with our social media, and for further information on these events, visit our website and our Instagram page. And thank you all again, and enjoy your day.
Feel free to email if you have questions.
Yeah, same here. Thank you all.
Michael.brand@utoronto.ca. Yeah, happy to help out.
Yeah, maybe you can provide our contact information.
Yeah.
And we can, yeah. I'm always happy. I love talking about archaeology. If anyone goes my office hours, it could be.
Yep. It'll be even nicer next week when we'll be able to see each other in person.
Yeah. I'm just gonna put in, oh, well, let's put it in the email, your contact information. All right, thank you for coming for our event and for giving us so much information.
Yeah, thank you for
thanks for the invitation.
Hope it helped. Yeah, nice to see you all. Nice to see you, Mike.
Yeah, you too. It's been a while. Nice to see people without masks on, so I can see what you know the other half of your face looks like.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
That concludes our session. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.